this wonderful opportunity. So my first question is a common one, and I request each member of the panel to express their opinion regarding the same. Of late, there has been a lot of talk about lack of employee loyalty. Business leaders worldwide have attributed the high employee turnover rates to this lack of loyalty from the side of employees. And even the three of us, during our discussion, we felt that loyalty is the foundation of the psychological contract that brings together employers and employees. And without loyalty, it's very difficult for organizations to achieve their objectives. So I would like this panel to tell us if this is really a cause of concern, and if this issue of loyalty is a natural corollary to the rise of the gig workforce in our country and worldwide. I hope I have expressed my question clearly. And I think it's fitting that I invite my namesake, Vineet sir, to address this question first.
Well, thank you, my namesake, and good evening to all of you. Very grateful to Soil and more to our authors, Dr. Arvind Agarwal and Professor T.V. Rao. Coming straight to loyalty, well, there are some thoughts that one can share. Again, depending on what one has seen, what we have experienced ourselves. What is loyalty, I think, is something that one will have to see in context. Maybe 50 years back, when maybe some of our parents also started, the main source of employer or employment was either government or 2-3 large corporations in this country. And typically, I remember when we used to have these presentations, as we call it today, we used to make a 20-25 years career chart before students. Well, 25 years, 30 years was fine that time. Today, I'm not sure whether we do that. Many years back, when I started my career in recruitment for the first few months. If we found an application of a person who had changed many jobs, we used to keep the application aside. Today, I don't know which application we keep aside. Okay. The third aspect is the opportunities itself. Well, while CEOs do complain about loyalty, the question from the employee side, and again, these are remarks that will come not to be taken personally. How many CEOs and HR heads have been loyal in the traditional sense, or psychological contracts have been sort of looked at? I think is another question for employees. Fact of the matter, as I look at it today, is twofold or threefold. One and foremost is that there are opportunities. And if there are opportunities, people would look at them. Many companies have created, developed, and prepared people for opportunities within their organization, whether through job rotations, whether through deployment or enriching jobs. That has succeeded for many of the companies. So there are cases both sides. Companies who have grown have been able to provide this opportunity, but to an extent where they couldn't provide beyond a point, employees have to be let go. Come to think of it, I think nobody joins an organization to leave it. Very simply. Everybody joins, at least I would think so, to contribute and make a career. So there have to be some reasons. And the last reason I'll expect is because somebody paid more salary. Because the salary discussion starts after every other discussion is over normally. By that time, the employer, she has made her mind. She has gone for 2-3 rounds of discussion. So quite some things have happened. So this whole piece of loyalty, rather than blaming the employee or the environment or anything, this thing, I think I would do more as an organization. What more can I do as an organization to at least retain and get the psychological contract with the talent I need, with the people I need? What is it that I can do differently so that, Because one thing is for sure, every replacement or rehire normally is more expensive than the earlier person in cost and in terms of the time to recruit and the role not getting filled up, etc., training the person, getting her ready for the role. So it's not a very happy situation. So it's a continuous process. People rising up to the occasion, building up in terms of skills and capabilities that are required for the organization, not today, but for day after tomorrow. And organizations being able to provide the opportunity. So these are some quick thoughts that come to mind. I thought I'll just put them across. But very straight away bracketing that employees are less loyal, the counter can be how loyal are employers these days. So I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. You summed it up pretty well. Over to Pradeep, sir.
Pradeep, you're on mute.
I'm sorry about that. Thank you, Vineet. Both the Vineets, actually. More importantly, thank you, Anil. Thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity to share this platform with two esteemed colleagues and leaders in the profession. Of course, one has to thank Dr. Arvind Agarwal and Professor T.V. Rao, without whom I won't be here. Coming back to your question, I think like Vineet said, loyalty is a two-way street. And to me, the connotation of the word also is typically used only in the context of employees. But given what organizations have been doing and continue to do, and it's becoming a practice in India too, which is expected because of the larger environments in which businesses work today. If employers can get rid of employees to satisfy a short-term shareholder need, then there is no reason why anyone can expect something else in return, right? So it's a two-way street, as I said. And I think the other piece is this also, in my view, has to be seen in the social context in which we are operating today. Every time you hear that in each generation thinks that the next generation is very different, has changed, right? Even in our families, we hear that, and we see it also. It's not just about hearing that, our willingness in our generation, and I'm speaking about the three bald people on this. I'm sorry, Salman, I'm not including you in this, but the three of us who have lost our hair in the process somewhere along the way, we used to probably obey our parents, or at least give a lot more weightage to what our parents said than what we can expect from our children today, right? And that's a common complaint. So, but that's a social shift. It's taking place. And I think a large part of it is what Vineet said. Opportunities have opened up. Economical, social, political changes have happened in society. And all of those are leading to changes, which one may call evolution, or one may call, changes and look at it in a bad light. But I personally think that there are a lot of changes taking place, and loyalty is one of those things where the value of it, or the definition of it, is also changing. To me, honestly, the definition really is, as long as the person is working with you, are you giving that person the emotional, social, material satisfaction, intellectual satisfaction, which is the reason why the person has joined you in the first place? And that, I think, is our responsibility as employers. And to me, the definition, therefore, is not normal definition that we associate with long-term just commitment, irrespective of circumstances. But if you want a talent, can you sort of frame the experience for that talent in a manner that the aspiration of that talent is consistently being met with? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Well said. Over to Vivek, sir.
Well, I think Pradeep and Vineet have very aptly described the concept of loyalty, but let me also make an attempt. I'm not sure whether the word loyalty is an appropriate word to be used. Uh, I think between employer and employee, it's a pure and simple commercial contract. And with the afflux of time, that is retirement age, the person quits. So the concept of loyalty, I think, is a highly questionable concept in itself when it's a pure and simple commercial contract. I was reflecting back just now on my father, who started his career with Bank of Baroda way back in late 40s and retired in mid 80s. So about 40 odd years of long career, started as a probationary officer and retired as a general manager. Was he a loyal person to the bank? Is a question that came to my mind. My question that came to my mind was he delighted, very happy person there in the bank? My answer is absolutely not. He went through his own stresses, he went through his own strains, he went through his own agonies, but he continued working there, not because he loved the bank, but because maybe there were no other options, there were no opportunities available at that point of time. If he was a banker in today's life, he would have probably changed 4 jobs. And that doesn't make him disloyal or a bad person. I changed about 4 jobs in the initial 10 years of my life. My son must have changed at least 6, 7 jobs in first 5 years. Does that indicate that as a generation we are deteriorating? Answer is no. It is just that opportunities are available far more today than what they were available at that point of time. I think what an employee is looking forward to is a thing that we got to start concerned about. Employees looking for continued employability. Employees looking forward to a satisfactory career. Employees looking forward to good coaching and mentoring, a good leadership, a right culture, and a right value system that is in sync with his own life value systems and so on and so forth. As long as an employer is able to provide those psychological comforts to the employee will continue to work. As Vineet rightly mentioned, nobody joins a company with an objective to change the job. You join the company with an objective to have a long-term career, with an objective to learn, and with an objective to contribute. However, the people change jobs not because they are disloyal, but because they are unhappy with some or other aspect of the work life. And we got to, as HR professionals, focus on that. And I think I'll stop here because to me, loyalty is a concept which I have never sort of given a thought. And loyalty is not something which I'm committed to.
Thank you, sir. Wonderful discussion. I think the takeaway for all of us is that organizations should ask themselves if they are doing enough to deserve the loyalty of their employees rather than blaming them for things going wrong. So thank you so much. I now invite my classmate, Senjuti, to take over. Over to you, Senjuti.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. I thank you for giving me this opportunity to interact and be a part of this session. Uh, Hello, Pradeep sir. My question would be to you. I have read about you in the book, and it's my absolute privilege to read about you, the amazing work that you have done, uh, the stands that you have taken in tough times, and the way you have handled situations. It's really great to read about all of that. My question would be that I have read that you have worked across different geographies, especially with Citigroup and and you have worked in New York, Dubai, as well as India. So, how have you seen the cultural differences or variations in HR practices across different geographies? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Senjuti. First of all, thank you for the kind words. Yes, there have obviously been cultural differences in the environment that one worked in. For example, in Dubai, while the workforce was very small, relatively speaking, in a workforce of 400 people, we had actually 103 nationalities. So that's Dubai, and that continues to be Dubai, right? And therefore, in terms of how you deal with that kind of a culture and how do you deal with um, the variety and the diversity in people in that culture is something that's great. But if you ask me honestly, at the end of the day, it's people dealing with people. And the basics are the same, irrespective of which environment you work in and which culture environment you work on. Yes, there might be certain cultural norms that you have to be sensitive to, right? So as an example, in Dubai, you don't sit cross-legged. They normally sit side by side. When you sit with someone who's respecting, who's your boss, he will probably come out of his chair behind the table and, sit side by side. They have two chairs facing each other in front of the table, right? Now you don't, or if you're sitting on a sofa, you don't lift your leg cross-legged as we do here, right? And that's showing disrespect because the shoe is pointing at them. So you just have to understand some of the cultural norms. But and there have been differences. There are obviously those differences. But when it comes to dealing with people, honestly, it's the same things everywhere. It doesn't matter who you respect the person, listen to the person, empathize with the person. It's the same. There is absolutely no difference whatsoever. When it comes to HR practices, some of these HR practices obviously change depending upon both the economic and social circumstances of the place, right? So you have to take some of those into consideration. Simple things, very, very simple things. I mean, yes, you need to provide a prayer room in Dubai, right? You need to make sure that your timings are in sync with the Ramadan timings in that place, right? So these are very basic, simple stuff which everyone follows because that's the norm in that particular place. In New York, yes, people travel, so it's okay to have meetings at 8 o'clock in the morning. But because people get up early there in the eastern, both in the US, actually, all parts of the US, right? So those nuances change, but otherwise it's the same. And since I worked in a multinational organization, obviously many of the philosophies of practices were also the same around the world. So it didn't matter which part of the world you are when it comes to specific, but your policies have to be attuned to the social, economic, and the kind of people you have in your workforce. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Actually, we are studying international HR, so it will be really helpful after getting your insights on these topics. Thank you, sir. So, Kirti, I would like to invite you to put in your question.
Sure.
Over to you.
Yeah, good evening again, everyone. So my question goes out to Mr. Vineet Kaul, sir. First of all, sir, I would like to thank you on behalf of SOIL for being here. Pleasure to host all of you here. So I read the chapter. I read the chapter, and while reading the chapter, I came across cases where you, in your experience, had always stayed upright in your beliefs and even faced backlash and animosity because of the same. To mention one instance regarding the encounter that you faced with the workmen at the telco cafeteria. So how did you continue standing by your principles and beliefs even after some unpleasant encounters at the workplace? I would like to know about that from you, sir.
Thank you, Sukriti, and thank you again, all my soil colleagues. This is a very, very good question. And I think most important, if I listen to that question or read that, what I talked to Dr. Arvind Akwal, it also surprises me. Especially, I think most important is the context. It has some relatability with the first question that we are all answering. So at that point of time, I think very much, whether you may call it in terms of today we use the word purpose. I didn't know the term that time. But in terms of the interest, the passion one had was very clear. And maybe it was to do also with the, you may call it at times, a little more of stupidity. But the fact is, well, if somebody has come to do a job, one better do it and do it really well. And to give an example, I am again saying what we say, or I or any of our colleagues say, had a context. I would at no point of time say that please follow something that I did, because it was a different era, different context, etc. Coming to this fact of animosity, etc. Okay, so the 2-3 things always came to my mind, and I will just maybe share them. If I get too prescriptive, please stop me, or Salman can shut me out also. So the first and foremost is, very early I decided one thing, that contrary to belief that as a manager or as an officer, people felt that we should talk to workers through the union. I just didn't agree with that concept. The day when my thinking was, an employee first joins the company, he or she, there are very few she in manufacturing, sorry, that time, are first an employee. After that, they take the membership of union. So I don't, as a company officer or employee, need a union's clearance or permission to talk to workmen, because that used to be the established practice. And believe you me, most managers used to use that as a very good wall not to talk to employees. Even today, maybe many managers don't talk to employees. They look for either maybe social media today or look to some system. So that's one thing very good. The second thing I followed and have tried always is, first get convinced yourself. I was convinced that this is an indiscipline act, or if this is a challenge, if it is a restrictive practice, very simply, like the 3 monkeys, they, sorry, this pun I'm trying to put forth. You can keep your eyes closed, you can keep your ears closed, and you can keep your mouth closed and carry on. Things are okay. But if a restrictive practice is there, I can blame the past, I can blame the union, I can blame the government or obsolete labor laws. Even today, many of us do it. But despite that, let me tell you, our profession, many of our colleagues have delivered. So these constraints, if I look at it a little more holistically today, will be there. Despite all that we read of M&A, etc., that is done for looking at talent, there's the last piece on the list. The first is the valuation and the economic addition that comes. You have to still make it work. So similarly, if there's a restrictive practice and you're seeing it, I couldn't stand it and say that, okay, this is there, what can I do? At least make an attempt. Maybe I didn't succeed always. And some of the places I shared, maybe some Arvindji wrote or not, I didn't succeed. It was not easy. But I couldn't sit and just watch, because that's the easiest thing to do. Secondly, I was not in a popularity neta abhineta mode, please. As the personal, we didn't have the word HR until Dr. T.V. Rao and others brought these things forward. The point was, there is a job to be done. Now, whether you feel it's a dirty job or you feel it's not a good job to do, etc., somebody has to do it. So passing the buck was not something I would give in. And maybe perhaps little, you could say, hot-headed at that time. I couldn't stand something just being pushed under the carpet. I neither digested BS nor gave BS all through, very clearly. So this is one of the facts. So the thick skin becomes so thick. Once you get assaulted, once you get abused, then nothing is going to change much here. What more can happen? And today, like people say, at best I can lose a job. Okay, that time we didn't think of all that. So maybe These are some things that kept going. And the point was only, believe in me, Sukriti, it was living by the day. One had no great plan that this is where this will take me, or this is what contribution will happen. Yes, that mention that I made, that an action was taken by management, and then I was called and explained. And one of the few times the director spoke to me was to coolly tell me that, young man, we have to withdraw the suspension orders. And actually, very obediently, I said, yes, in the interest of the company, I think it's the right thing. I don't know today if I would say it that way. When I look back at it, I think, yes, that was the time and age. Yes, one took it in the stride. Will today somebody take it? I would not advise someone that, do these things. So what I'm saying is the context is important. The facts and the situations are very different. And there's a lot of give and take. I used to get some things that I used to also give back. So in that spirit, I think it was more a learning period. And yes, it was not a very enjoyable play. That I can tell you even today. But yes, one took it in the stride and didn't walk off just because of one incident. Not at all. So that's the way I look at it. And, blame was the easiest thing. Even today it is. I somehow tried to avoid that. Because that even at that time, somehow it didn't come to me. I said, fine, it's... and it was not that I had some big title or designation, etc. I was in my initial years in large companies like that, at the flunky or junior most level, you may call it. But yes, I felt I could do a job. I did it. I don't know, Sukriti, if I've really dotted all the I's and cut the T's, but this is how it is.
Yes, sir. Sure. Yeah, yes, sir. You have. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Over to Vineet.
Thank you, Sukirti. My question is to Vivek sir. So I went through the chapter, very fascinating. But one thing that caught my attention was post your elevation to the role of head of HR, Southeast Asia for HP, you faced a lot of hostility from your colleagues, especially those from China and Australia, who believed that you were not the right person for the job and was not, cooperative. So could you please take us through this phase and tell us how, we can counter such interpersonal issues, which we are likely to encounter in our careers as well. So you're on mute.
Well, it's a reality of life that there is always a racial discrimination when you go abroad. And that racial discrimination is very much predominant within Australia. For Australians to accept anybody from India as their superior or their boss is tough. In Singapore, it's far more so. I'm a Singapore citizen now, but it's very difficult for Singaporeans to accept that non-Singaporeans will come and become their bosses. They believe that only the white man can be their boss, but not a brown man from India. Now, this is a cultural issue of both Singapore as well as Australia. I'm not saying China. I would use the word Singapore and Australia. Now, in this kind of an environment, the only way to manage is to establish your credibility through your performance. You establish your credibility through your knowledge, and establish your credibility to establish excellent relationships over a period of time. And you have to put in far more harder work in order to do that. And that is what I did. It took time for me to succeed, but one eventually succeeds.
Thank you so much, sir. I now invite our alumnus, Mr. Indrajit Chatterjee, to take the discussion forward.
Thank you, Vineet. My question is to Pradeep, sir. Sir, I would like you to throw some light on the implications of the recent mass layoffs on the following approaches. One would be the existing employees' approach or outlook towards job security on one hand, and the job excitement, satisfaction, and growth. The second would be uh, the candidates' outlook towards the tech giants. Typically, they call it as a dream job, but the maximum number of layoffs have happened in those organizations. So, what would be the potential outlook towards these so-called dream jobs now? And the third would be, what would be an organization's approach be towards recruitment in the near future and overall HR strategy? Thank you.
Thank you, Indraji. That's quite a handful. So let me sort of see if I can address all of your questions. Let's take the existing employees first. I think when there is, obviously, it's a general knowledge that when there is such a thing that happens, there is tremendous amount of insecurity at the workplace. And in my experience, I don't think that insecurity goes away quickly. It stays. And one of the questions I think we all sort of try to give our views on is loyalty. And this is where loyalty goes for a toss, right? So and I think Vivek put it beautifully when he said it's a contract. This is where the contract really gets emphasized. And the insecurity that exists, in my view, from the experiences that I've had, even though, to be honest with you, I've been very lucky to have only those where people have volunteered. So even then, the kind of insecurity that it generates is tremendous. And when it generates insecurity, fact of life is work suffers. And fact of life is and this is where actually, in my view, HR plays a significant role. When you have to do this, what HR needs to work on really is the people who have been left behind. And how do you build that, connect with them? How do you give them that feel without being false about it, that they still are important? And that comes back to transparency. So yes, the people who have been left behind, they are people that HR really has to focus on after such an action in any organization, in my view. Candidates in tech job, to be honest with you, I talked to my daughter the other day. She's a techie in the Valley. And, matter of fact approach, we live 2 weeks at a time. So she's supposed to come here in the next month. And I was asking her, have you made this plan? Baba, we live 2 weeks at a time. Don't talk to me. I think they have taken it as part and parcel of life because they have had it so far, as is something that has always existed in US. But the kind of jobs that these tech companies provide, the kind of especially the ones that you're referring to who have laid off mass people, right? The Microsofts, the Googles, Facebook, the kind of jobs and opportunities that these people provide and the money, let's not forget that. I don't think they're going to have any trouble attracting people because people have taken it as a fact of life that in corporate, at least in corporate America, I think we need to see how that plays out in India. For the simple reason that one of the things that I resisted layoffs for is India does not, unlike the US or in Europe, does not have a social security system. And I think organizations have to be extremely cognizant of that. Apart from what I think Vineet mentioned earlier, that when you actually lay off people, if you're laying off people for a business that is going to continue, right? It's a waste of money because you are going to pay money for people to go and you're going to pay them a lot more, as Vineet had said earlier, to get to replace them, which you will, unless you're shutting the business down totally, forever, right? Which is never the case. So how it will play out in India is something that, one has to, in my view, at least from my experience, has to watch the space and see. Because in India, unlike it's a new phenomenon. It's not something that people have got used to. B, I think in India, and my own perception, and forgive me for saying this, but I think we are a little more, in organizations, good organizations, we have a little bit of a paternalistic approach to employees, and employees also expect that paternalistic approach. I have seen that in my experience, right? So what that's going to do with this, with layoff, what are layoffs going to do with that part of the psychological contract? I don't know. It has to be seen. But I suspect it will take the same path as the US. Initially, it'll be very difficult. But over a period of time, I think people will sort of accept that this is an economic reality of working in corporations, because it is going to be an economic reality of working in corporations. I'm sorry, can you repeat your third part, organizations?
Yeah, the third part is what lesson have organizations learned regarding recruitment in the near future specifically?
Really don't know whether I have enough information and data to sort of, I think because it's new in India, it's in the Indian context, right? In the Western context, it's a business as usual, right? You sort of figure out what you want to recruit and you go back into the market. In fact, in India, I've heard there are companies that are recruiting people while laying off others. Now that is in the US and Western world, it is a fact of life. In India, how that plays out is something that one will have to see. I don't think I have enough experience to be able to tell you how organizations are going to deal with recruitment. It's unfortunate that the whole purpose of layoff, if you boil it down, is really a simple shareholder satisfaction tool. It's as simple as that in my strong view. Because unless you're closing down a business, that's a separate issue. That's understandable, as long as it's understandable and as long as there is merit in the argument and in the decision making. But if you're just doing it as many companies today are doing it because they have been exuberant in their hiring as a result of COVID and post-COVID expectations, then it's just a short-term game, which is a lot more expensive to shareholders than is made out. That's my view. Maybe my colleagues have a different experience or they have a different perspective.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Pradeep sir, for letting out your views. I would be taking up a question from our Q&A, which is put by Mr. T.B. Rao. And I would request Mr. Vineet Kaul sir and Mr. Vivek sir to answer it. And if Pradeep sir also likes, if he can throw some light on the question. So the question is the question and organization. How did you manage congruence between self-interest with profession and organization? So if either of you would like to go forward, followed by the next. Let me know if I need to repeat the question.
So, well, from whatever I could read, I just read, I think TV Rao has put a very, very intelligent question, and I'll attempt to respond to it. So, I remember in my early days, one of my seniors, he met me, he has just changed his 7th job, I was still in the same job. So another friend asked him, hey, how come you're not loyal? And believe me, this is not because of the first question, he actually asked him. He said, what nonsense? I'm very loyal to the profession. I've been all through in the personal function. It's a different matter that I've changed the company. So what? But I've been loyal to the function. So that's one way of looking at it. The second is, yes, both individuals and the organization, as I stated in the beginning also, whether it's a commercial contract or psychological contract, first begin the contract together in terms of taking the journey together. Somewhere there is a derailment. Now, the good, bad, ugly is not a judgment that I would like to make, but some things don't work out. At times, the organization is not too happy with the person. And often the person is not happy, and it could be a lot of internal engagement factors as you would study in your courses, or to do with, certain job. It could be, for example, a person could leave because of the location, especially given today that some people can live differently, the spouse working, etc. That could be, so there could be a variety of reasons. The second is organization per se. I've seen also people sticking on to an organization, despite whatever be the name, fame of that organization, positive or not so positive, it's a perception that people have outside. But to the employee, it is more important how he or she is being valued by that organization. It's not for an outsider like me to comment whether that person is loyal or no. It is for the employee. She is able to get what she wants from that organization. For her, that's the best organization. So I would not really try to classify organizations where people do not have loyal people staying or individuals per se. I think experiences differ person to person. And at times also people see so-called growth. And especially in today's day and age, the title is very misleading. Not misleading, maybe it's very attractive. Let me put it more positively. That itself propels people to look at the job, chunk, size, whatever, and etc. So there are a variety of factors which play on the mind of each professional. And I'm sure everybody, most of the people do make an informed choice. And believe in me, coming again back to the first question, if organization gets somebody better than A today, they wouldn't mind getting in B tomorrow over A. That's very clear. So again, coming to what Vivek said, it's a commercial contract. Like Vivek, I don't know whether you recall one old cricketer sometime back, Virendra Sehwag. I remember his line very clearly. Jab tak balla chalta hai, aap chalte ho. So it's very clear, as long as there is delivery, contribution, things like recognition, even retention will be there. The moment there is a mismatch, either in terms of the organization not getting its due or things not panning out, variety of reasons, this people join organizations but leave managers, all these reasons can keep coming. But some mismatch, if it is there, definitely there will be a dissonance. So I'm again saying it in very general terms. There is a need to understand the issue in a particular person and an organization. I think details help. That's all I would say.
Excellent. Wonderful listening to all of you. And one of the common threads that's running in each of your stories is the guts to swim against the tide, to call a spade a spade. And that's really, those are such wonderful qualities that all of us can learn from. One specific, point that I noted when I was reading up about your stories, and I would specifically refer to yours, Mr. Mukherjee. It says that some of your bosses found you to be intimidating within quotes. So this is a very unique sort of a situation in employer-employee kind of relationships. I would like to hear from you. How did you counter or deal with this kind of a perception amongst your superiors? What are some of the things that you did?
Thanks a lot, Salman. So let me preface my response by saying I'll tell you what are some of the things you should not do, because I did exactly the things I should not have done. But first, just context of where it came from. I was going to the Kellogg's for a 3-week management program, executive management program, and on the way I thought I'd sort of stop by in New York and meet with some senior leaders, which I'd never used to do before. So one of the things that I think I looking back at that career, I think my biggest mistake in life has been I have not given importance to relationships, and I would urge your students to put that very much on the radar. So anyway, so that's when I was talking to my so I met at that point in time the number 2 HR person for City Group, Global City Group, and he is the one who many years ago had hired me from the software organization of City that I started with to the bank. So I just met him, and we just were chatting over a cup of coffee, and so I just asked him this question. I said, Alan, where do you think I'm going? He said, Pradeep, you should have been, somewhere much higher up. Your problem is you don't build relationships with your bosses. I said, I don't have time of the day. They don't have time of the day. What do you mean by that? And I'm sort of elaborating on this because I personally believe if I were to change one thing among many other things, but if I were to change one thing about myself and careers, and therefore as a lesson to your students, is please focus on relationships. So to me, it was, frankly, I didn't respect them because I didn't see them bringing any value to my job or to the HR profession in the bank. And therefore, I told, so Alan said, you could have been, at a much, much senior position even today, had you focused on building relationships and not intimidated your bosses. I said, what? What do I do? You, on one hand, you're telling me I don't interact with them. On the second hand, you're telling me I intimidate them. So where is it? So that's where it came from, really, because I am a person, if I believe something, I will say it. And unfortunately, I am a little more passionate than I should be demonstrative of. So that's another thing that is a lesson to the students. So I can tell you a lot of things that you should not do. And those are two things that I should not do. But it obviously impacted my career because I didn't respect them. And well, this person told me that they felt intimidated by me. I can only assure you that I didn't do anything to intimidate you, but sometimes as I've coached leaders, I've found that passion actually demonstrated too much can be a weakness.
Excellent. Excellent. If I may turn to Mr. Paranjpe, there is, when you were heading HP's HR function for Asia Pac, and bringing in a lot of wonderful HR practices into the system. In fact, I recollect back in the days when I just started with HCL and we had a joint venture with HP at that point in time. The organization itself was called HCL Hewlett Packard. And that JV had actually helped bring in a lot of wonderful HR practices into the HCL scheme of things as well. So, Mr. Paranjpe, how did you ensure that a lasting culture, which was very different from previous HR cultures that existed in the country, was successfully created?
Well, it's a great question, Salman. I was the first employee of Hewlett Packard in India. So I had no baggage to take forward to, but I had all the opportunities to create the culture in the company. And as Anil rightly mentioned at the very beginning, Hewlett Packard was known as one of the excellent companies to work with, and HP Way was the buzzword for the culture that existed. Now, things that I learned in Hewlett Packard was be completely aligned to the values of the company and not to the practices and processes. And I think that is something which was absolutely critical for me. And I'll give examples. When you said that we value employees, we trust and respect employees. Now, the moment I say I trust and respect employees is a value of the company, my question is, are your practices aligned to that value? And unfortunately, most of the time they are not. And that revelation came to me when I was part of a team that was creating the first factory of Hewlett Packard at Bangalore. And I had the blueprints of the factory in front of me, and my boss came from Hong Kong. He was the functional head, regional HR head. And I was showing him that entire plan. And he said, "What is this big building that you have created at the gate?" I said, "This building is created mainly because it's not only a security gate, but this is where we'll be frisking our employees when they go back. So I need a frisking room for women, I need a frisking room for men, and time office, and so on and so forth." He says, "Vivek, don't you trust and respect your employees?" I said, "Of course we trust and respect our employees." Then he says, "If you trust them and if you respect them, you will be frisking them. So your practice of frisking is not in sync with the value of the company. So I do not support that." And we had long conversation on it, long discussion on it. In Indian context, frisking is pretty normal, and so on and so forth. And then he said, "Vivek, if you want to frisk your workers, will you be frisking your managers?" I said, "No, we will not be frisking managers." Then he says, "That means you trust your managers, but don't trust your workers. This is not HP way." Now, you got to start looking at various practices and examining them in depth and make sure that they are completely aligned to the value systems of the company. And that is how the cultures are built. I'll give another example. In those days, I'm talking of early 90s, late 80s, it was a very common practice in India to have medical reimbursement program, wherein you said that your employee can get up to 10,000 rupees worth of medical reimbursement. And normally the employee will produce fake bills. You go to a chemist and get a fake bill and submit it and get the cash from the company. And that was a tax-free benefit that employees got. And I was conversing on that topic with my boss, saying that this is the practice in India, medical reimbursement plan. He says, "We do not support it as a corporation, because that's not the culture that we want to build. We talk of trust, we talk of loyalty, we talk of multiple things. We want to be honest. And you are telling your employees, go and bring fake bills." Now, that is not the culture that we want to build. And then my argument was, if we do not do that, then we'll have to increase the compensation, because take home pay, the people will be affected. He says, "Fair enough. What's the cost of that? Increase the compensation by 4-5%. Go ahead and do it, but do not ask for fake bills." And I think that is how the cultures are built. I'll give another example. In Hewlett Packard at that time, there was a practice of having beer busts. And these beer busts were the programs wherein the manager and his employees would have a beer at least once in a quarter, at the end of the quarter. And at the end of the quarter, when the results to be announced, you would have a beer bust. So I said, this beer bust to India mein nahi chalega. If I start a factory and say factory workers and the manager will come and have a beer, and they will, it's not in sync with the Indian culture. So again, I went into depth to find out what is the purpose of beer bust. I'm not going to bring that practice from US or from Singapore into India just because that's a HP practice. I need to understand what is the purpose behind it. And the purpose behind, as I explored, was to establish informal, friendly relationships between manager and the employees, wherein the employees feel comfortable to talk to the managers and air out their issues, grievances, etc. And one occasion was once in a quarter, you announce the quarterly results, have a glass of beer together, some snacks, and be with it. So I said, in India, we are not going to have beer bust. But we are going to probably have Satyanarayan Puja. Maybe we are going to have something else, and so on and so forth. Should we have Vishwakarma Puja? They're all local Indian practices that we brought into India to substitute a lot of practices that existed outside India. But we had to make sure that every practice that we created or we brought in was completely aligned to the value systems of the company. Because if it is not aligned to the value systems of the company, it is not sustainable. And that's not going to build the right culture. So I think we got to make sure that these things happen. And again, you cannot have one common practice across the whole company. When I went to Singapore, I faced that issue. We had a large manufacturing facility in Singapore employing about 10,000 people. And next to that was our corporate regional office, wherein we had Salesforce. So as and when a salesman will bring a big deal of $1 million or something, then the boss would call for pizza and he will open a bottle of champagne and he'll say, great job done, and we'll have a glass of champagne and pizza to celebrate that $1 million order. Now, question that comes up is, are we going to do the same thing in factory? As and when a milestone is achieved, are we going to open champagne bottles and bring pizza and eat pizza and drink champagne with 10,000 workers? Answer is absolutely not. Again, the purpose was celebrate success. And I think what needs to be done is, as students, I mean, I would urge you to understand the purpose behind a practice rather than bringing a practice for the sake of bringing the practice. That practice was to celebrate success. Now, the way to celebrate in a sales office will be different from the way to celebrate in a manufacturing unit. The way to celebrate in Singapore will be different from the way to celebrate in India, and so on and so forth. The value is celebrating success. And I think that is where it becomes then very easy for you to sort of create the right culture, right environment, and you got to discuss these things with your managers and with your workers as to why we are different from other parts of the world. And that uniqueness of our local Indian culture is critical to us and it's important to us, and we will align everything to our culture based on our value systems. The anchor is value systems and everything else follows. I don't know if I've answered your question, Salman.
Brilliantly, Mr. Baranchway. I think you couldn't have put it better. You brought out all the facets of this issue so nicely. Thank you so much for your response. We have pretty much reached the end of our time slot, but we can possibly, if it's okay with the three of you, take one more question. So if any of the panelists or somebody in the audience has a quick question that any of our panelists can answer. Quick final question.
We can't hear her.
Cannot hear. No, I think it's not very clear. Anil, any final comments from you?
Well, I just want to say that, this has been an absolutely amazing session. Right through, when I was like a fly on the wall listening to all three of you, I was really thrilled. And thank you, my fellow colleagues. Thank you, Indrajit. Thank you, Sanjuti. Thank you, Vineet. Thank you, Sukirti. And thank you, Salman, for doing it so well, the hosting of the entire session. I learned a lot. I'm sure you also enjoyed it. And thank you very much, everybody, for being such a wonderful audience. And I'm sure many more people will watch this online after this session is over. So thank you, and God bless everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
For having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.